Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we are diving into the dark and terrifying world of Insidious, Out of the Further, the latest supernatural horror film and the sixth installment in the Insidious franchise. In this video, we are going to explain the complete story of the movie in detail, following Gemma, a young mother who returns to her childhood home with her daughter and soon discovers that she possesses a frightening connection to the Further, the mysterious realm inhabited by lost and dangerous spirits. What begins as an unusual, supernatural ability quickly turns into a nightmare when Gemma realizes that she can bring entities from the Further into the real world. As powerful and malevolent forces discover her ability, the boundary between the living world and the spirit world begins to collapse, putting Gemma and her daughter in terrible danger. We will go through the important events, characters, supernatural mysteries, terrifying encounters, and major twists of the story, while also explaining what the ending means. Along with the complete story explanation, we will review the movie, discuss its horror elements, atmosphere, performances, storyline, and overall impact, and finally tell you whether Insidious, Out of the Further is worth watching. So, stay with us until the end, because this supernatural nightmare is about to take us deep into the Further. The story of Insidious, Out of the Further begins with Gemma, a young mother who is trying to build a peaceful life for herself and her daughter. Gemma is not the kind of person who goes looking for supernatural experiences. She is simply a mother who wants to protect her child and give her a stable childhood. But Gemma has spent much of her own life carrying the weight of a troubled past, and that past is connected to the very house where she now lives. Instead of leaving her childhood home behind forever, Gemma has chosen to return to it with Mo. She hopes that by raising her daughter there, she can transform the place that once represented fear into a home filled with love and safety. However, the moment Gemma returns, the audience begins to understand that the house has a history that has never truly disappeared. There are memories buried inside those rooms, memories connected to Gemma's mother and to strange events that Gemma experienced when she was a child. At first, Gemma tries to convince herself that the past is simply the past. She has grown older, she has become a mother herself, and she believes she is strong enough to prevent the mistakes of the previous generation from affecting Moa. Unfortunately, she is about to discover that some things cannot simply be left behind. Gemma's childhood was deeply affected by her relationship with her mother, Ingrid. When Gemma was young, Ingrid experienced disturbing episodes that left her daughter frightened and confused. Ingrid would sometimes disappear into strange states, sleeping for long periods and behaving in ways that Gemma could not understand. To a young child, these experiences seemed like signs that something was terribly wrong with her mother. Gemma did not have the knowledge to understand the supernatural world, so she naturally interpreted what she saw through the limited understanding of a frightened child. She learned to live with uncertainty, never knowing whether the next night would be peaceful or whether something strange would happen again. As Gemma grew older, she eventually tried to distance herself from those memories. She wanted to believe that her mother's problems were caused by ordinary circumstances, and that she could leave the darkness of her childhood behind by becoming an independent adult. But the return to the old house slowly forces Gemma to question everything she thought she understood about her past. Maya, meanwhile, represents everything Gemma wants to protect. She is still young and innocent, and she has no understanding of the supernatural danger surrounding her family. Gemma tries to create an ordinary mother-daughter relationship with her. She wants Maya to feel safe in the house and does not want her daughter to become frightened by stories about spirits, demons, or the Further. This is especially important because Gemma understands how damaging fear can be to a child. She remembers what it felt like to be alone with questions that no adult could properly answer. Because of that experience, Gemma becomes determined to shield Maya from anything that might disturb her. The tragedy is that the supernatural forces surrounding Gemma are not interested in respecting that boundary. They are already moving closer to Maya, and Gemma's own mysterious abilities may eventually become the reason those forces find their way into her daughter's life. The first major mystery begins when Gemma discovers that her connection to the supernatural is much stronger than she ever imagined. she starts experiencing strange encounters that cannot be explained through ordinary logic. There are moments when familiar spaces suddenly feel unfamiliar, as if another world is overlapping the physical world around her. The atmosphere of the house becomes increasingly disturbing, and Gemma begins to sense that she is not alone. What makes these experiences particularly frightening is that they are connected to something called the Further. The Further is a mysterious realm existing beyond the normal world, a place inhabited by spirits, lost souls, and terrifying entities. It has appeared throughout the Insidious story, but Gemma's connection to it introduces a new and dangerous possibility. She is not merely someone who can sense spirits. She has the ability to enter the Further herself. At first, Gemma does not understand what is happening to her. Entering the Further is frightening because the realm does not follow the rules of the physical world. Familiar places can become distorted. Darkness seems to exist everywhere, and the presence of spirits can be felt even when they cannot immediately be seen. Gemma realizes that when she enters this realm, she is vulnerable to the entities that live there. But there is something different about her. She is not simply a visitor. Gemma possesses an unusual ability that allows her to interact with the things she encounters there. More importantly, she discovers that she can bring things from the Further back into the physical world. This ability changes everything, because the boundary between the two worlds is supposed to keep the living and the dead separated. Gemma's existence creates a doorway between them. The discovery is terrifying because Gemma initially thinks that her ability might simply be something she needs to learn to control. She does not yet understand that the entities of the Further can also recognize what she is capable of doing. To Gemma, the ability is a curse that she never asked for. To the spirits and demons trapped in the Further, however, she represents an opportunity. If Gemma can bring things out of that realm, then perhaps the entities themselves can use her to escape. Suddenly, Gemma is no longer simply being haunted. She is being hunted because of what she can do. As the supernatural activity becomes stronger, Gemma begins to uncover the connection between her abilities and her family history. The strange behavior of her mother, Ingrid, starts to look very different from the way Gemma remembered it. What if Ingrid was not simply suffering from an unexplained problem? What if she had also been connected to the Further? What if the terrifying experiences Gemma witnessed as a child were actually supernatural events that she was too young to understand? These questions forced Gemma to reconsider her entire childhood. The house that she thought represented trauma may actually be connected to a much larger supernatural history. Her mother's experiences, Gemma's own abilities, and potentially Maya's future may all be part of the same chain. This revelation also introduces one of the film's most important themes: the fear that parents can unintentionally pass their own trauma to their children. Gemma has spent years trying to escape the darkness of her childhood, but now she realizes that she may have carried that darkness with her. She has become a mother, yet she is now confronted with the possibility that Maya could inherit the same supernatural gift that once affected Ingrid, and now affects Gemma. The thought terrifies her because Gemma does not want Maya to experience the same fear, confusion, and loneliness that she experienced as a child. She wants to break the cycle, but she does not yet know whether the cycle can actually be broken. The supernatural threat becomes clearer when Gemma encounters Cyrus, a powerful and manipulative figure connected to the Further. Cyrus is different from the silent, mysterious entities Gemma might initially expect to find in that realm. He has his own goals, his own history, and a clear understanding of what Gemma's ability means. He recognizes that Gemma can potentially transport beings and objects between the Further and the living world. For Cyrus, this makes Gemma extremely valuable. He does not simply want to frighten her. He wants to exploit her ability. His goal is connected to freeing himself and other entities from the limitations of the Further, and Gemma may be the key they have been waiting for. This creates a terrifying situation for Gemma, because every attempt she makes to understand her ability potentially makes the supernatural problem worse. If she enters the Further, she risks encountering Cyrus and the other entities. If she refuses to enter, she may remain unable to understand what is happening to her family, and if she accidentally brings something back with her, she could give the spirits exactly what they need to invade the world of the living. Gemma therefore finds herself trapped between two worlds. She cannot simply run away from the house, because the supernatural connection is inside her. She cannot simply ignore the further, because its inhabitants have already noticed her. Most importantly, she cannot think only about her own survival because Maya is now caught in the middle of everything. The appearance of Elise Rainier adds another important layer to the story. Elise is already familiar with the further and understands how dangerous its inhabitants can be. Although her presence is connected to the supernatural nature of the story, she becomes an important guide for Gemma. Elise understands that Gemma's ability is unusual and that the situation surrounding her is different from an ordinary haunting. She helps Gemma understand that the further is not merely a place where dead spirits wander. It has its own dangers, its own rules, and its own powerful entities. Gemma therefore begins to realize that surviving this situation will require more than simply confronting one ghost. She must understand the connection between herself, her mother, her daughter, and the further. As the first part of the story reaches its turning point, Gemma's peaceful life begins collapsing around her. The house that she hoped would become a safe home for Mayo is transforming into the center of a supernatural conflict. The things Gemma once considered memories are becoming present dangers. The strange experiences from her childhood are beginning to repeat themselves. But now she's an adult who understands that something supernatural may actually be responsible. Most frightening of all, the entities on the other side have realized that Gemma can open the door between worlds. Gemma now understands that the real danger is not simply that something from the further might attack her. The greater danger is that something from the further might use her ability to enter the world permanently. If Cyrus succeeds, the consequences will extend far beyond Gemma's family. The further could become connected to the physical world in a way that allows dangerous entities to move freely between both realms. Gemma therefore faces a choice that becomes increasingly impossible. She must learn how to control the very power that frightens her, while also protecting Maya from the creatures that want to use that power. And as the connection between Gemma and the further grows stronger, she begins to understand the horrifying truth that her family may have been connected to this realm for much longer than she ever imagined. Her childhood was not simply a collection of traumatic memories. It was the beginning of a supernatural legacy. And now that legacy has reached Maya. As Gemma begins to understand that her connection to the further is real, the situation inside the house becomes increasingly dangerous. She can no longer dismiss the strange sounds, disturbing visions, and unexplained events as stress or memories from her childhood. The more she tries to investigate what is happening, the more she realizes that the supernatural presence around her is reacting to her. The house seems to become a place where the boundary between the living world and the further is unusually thin. Gemma begins to experience moments in which she feels as though she is standing in two places at once. One moment she is inside the familiar rooms of her childhood home, and the next she finds herself surrounded by the dark, distorted atmosphere of the further. These experiences are frightening because Gemma has no control over when the transition happens. She knows that entering the further exposes her to spirits and demons, but remaining completely ignorant is even more dangerous because something is clearly trying to communicate with her. The greatest concern is Maya. Gemma notices that her daughter is also beginning to experience unusual things, and this immediately makes Gemma afraid that the supernatural ability may have passed from one generation to another. Gemma's memories of Ingrid become increasingly important as she searches for answers. She begins looking through old belongings and trying to understand what her mother experienced before her death. The things she discovers suggest that Ingrid may have known much more about the further than Gemma ever realized. As a child, Gemma had interpreted her mother's behavior as frightening and unpredictable, but now she begins seeing those memories differently. Ingrid may have been struggling with the same supernatural connection that Gemma is experiencing. She may have been able to enter the further and interact with its inhabitants, but without proper guidance, that ability could have become overwhelming. Gemma begins to understand that her mother may have spent years trying to keep supernatural forces away from her family. This realization creates complicated emotions inside Gemma. She is angry at Ingrid for the childhood she was forced to endure, but she also begins to wonder whether her mother was actually trying to protect her The possibility that Ingrid had been fighting an invisible enemy changes the meaning of their entire relationship. Meanwhile, Maya's behavior becomes more concerning. She is still too young to understand what is happening, but she begins noticing things that adults cannot see. Gemma tries to reassure her daughter whenever Maya talks about strange sounds or frightening figures, but internally Gemma is terrified. She knows that children with a connection to the further can sometimes perceive things that ordinary people cannot. Maya's experiences therefore suggest that the supernatural ability may not have ended with Gemma. Gemma becomes increasingly protective, refusing to allow Maya to wander around the house alone and trying to keep her away from the places where the supernatural activity seems strongest. But the more Gemma tries to protect Maya, the more Maya begins asking questions. She wants to know why her mother is frightened, why certain rooms are forbidden, and why the house sometimes feels different at night. Gemma realizes that keeping Maya completely unaware may not be possible. Eventually, she may have to tell her daughter the truth. The situation becomes even more complicated when Gemma learns more about the further itself. She discovers that it is not simply a dark dimension filled with random ghosts. It is a place where souls and entities can remain trapped, sometimes for reasons that are connected to their own violent histories and unfinished desires. Some spirits may not necessarily want to hurt the living, while others are driven by hatred, fear, or a desire for control. Gemma begins to understand that not everything she encounters there is automatically evil. This distinction becomes important because her ability allows her to interact directly with these beings. She must learn to recognize which entities can be trusted and which ones are manipulating her. The further becomes a world of uncertainty in which appearances cannot always be trusted. A spirit that seems frightened may be hiding a dangerous intention, while something that looks terrifying may possess information Gemma desperately needs. During one of her encounters with the further, Gemma becomes increasingly aware of Cyrus. His presence seems to follow her, even when she tries to avoid him. Unlike the other entities, Cyrus appears to understand exactly what Gemma is capable of doing. He does not need to attack her immediately. Instead, he begins manipulating her through fear and temptation. He makes Gemma understand that her ability could potentially be used to communicate with the dead and perhaps even help people she has lost. For a grieving person, that possibility would be incredibly powerful. Gemma may be able to reach people from the past, perhaps even connect with her mother or others who have died. Cyrus understands that this emotional vulnerability can be used against her. He does not need to force Gemma to open the door. He simply needs to convince her that opening it will give her something she desperately wants. Gemma initially refuses to trust him. She has already seen enough of the further to understand that its inhabitants rarely offer something without demanding something in return. Yet Cyrus continues to appear, and each encounter becomes more disturbing. He begins demonstrating how easily the boundary between the worlds can be manipulated. Things that belong in the further begin appearing in the physical world, and Gemma realizes that her own actions may have helped make this possible. She becomes frightened that she has already opened a door that cannot easily be closed. The idea that an entity can cross over and remain in the real world changes everything. Gemma is no longer dealing with a haunting that can be contained inside one room. She may have created a pathway through which an entire supernatural threat could emerge. At home, the supernatural activity becomes more aggressive. Maya begins having frightening experiences of her own, and Gemma struggles to determine whether her daughter is seeing the same entities that she sees. The difference between dreams and reality becomes increasingly difficult to establish. Maya may wake up believing that she has seen someone standing in her room, while Gemma discovers evidence that something actually happened there. This creates one of the film's most disturbing ideas. The supernatural is no longer confined to Gemma's mind or to the further. It is beginning to interact directly with Maya. Gemma realizes that protecting her daughter may require her to confront the further rather than simply keep Maya away from it. Gemma's fear also becomes connected to her childhood. She remembers how helpless she felt when she was young, especially when Ingrid was unable to explain what was happening. Now Gemma finds herself in a similar position, except she is the parent. Maya looks to her for answers, and Gemma is terrified that she cannot provide them. She does not want to become like her own mother, unable to protect her child from forces she does not understand. This emotional conflict gives Gemma a strong reason to keep fighting. Her battle is not simply against demons. It is also against the fear that she will repeat her mother's failures. As Gemma continues searching for answers, she begins to understand that her ability has a deeper purpose. She can enter the further, interact with its inhabitants, and potentially bring them into the physical world. But if she can bring something out, there may also be a way to send something back. This possibility becomes extremely important. Gemma starts thinking less about escaping the supernatural world and more about learning its rules. If she can understand how the connection works, perhaps she can use it against Cyrus. But this is incredibly dangerous because every trip into the further increases the chance that she will become trapped there. Once inside, Gemma is surrounded by entities that know the realm far better than she does. Her only advantage is her connection to the physical world. The appearance of Elise becomes particularly significant at this stage. Elise understands the dangers of astral projection and knows that the further can manipulate fear, memories, and emotional weaknesses. She tries to guide Gemma through the experience and warns her that she cannot allow herself to become emotionally controlled by the entities she encounters. Gemma wants answers about her mother, her ability, and Maya, but Elise understands that the further can use those desires as weapons. The more desperately Gemma searches for someone she has lost, the easier it becomes for a malicious spirit to pretend to be that person. Gemma therefore has to learn one of the most important rules of surviving the further. Not everything that appears familiar is what it claims to be. Gemma's connection to Maya also becomes stronger during this period. She begins to suspect that Maya's own supernatural sensitivity is developing. Rather than seeing this only as a curse, Gemma realizes that Maya may eventually need to understand her ability just as Gemma herself has been forced to understand hers. The difference is that Gemma has the opportunity to protect Maya before the darkness fully takes hold. She decides that she will not hide the truth forever. If the supernatural world has chosen her family, then she needs to prepare Maya, rather than allow her daughter to encounter the further without warning. However, Cyrus is already moving closer to achieving his goal. He understands that Gemma's emotional connection to Maya is her greatest strength, but also her greatest weakness. If he can frighten Gemma enough, he can make her lose control of her ability. And if he can convince her that entering the further is the only way to save Maya, he may be able to manipulate her into opening the doorway even wider. The threat therefore becomes psychological as well as supernatural. Gemma cannot simply fight what she sees. She must also determine whether what she sees is real. The house eventually becomes the central point of the supernatural conflict. The rooms where Gemma once experienced fear as a child now become locations where the further seems to overlap with reality. Shadows move where there should be nothing. Sounds emerge from empty spaces. Familiar objects become reminders of. By the end of this stage of the story, Gemma has moved beyond denial. She accepts that she possesses supernatural ability and that her family has been connected to the further for generations. She understands that Maya may have inherited the same gift, and she knows that Cyrus is specifically targeting her because of it. She also realizes that the danger is growing every time the boundary between the two worlds becomes weaker. Gemma now has to make a terrifying decision. She can continue trying to keep the further away from her family, or she can deliberately enter it and confront the source of the threat. The second choice may be the only way to protect Maya, but it could also place Gemma exactly where Cyrus wants her. And as the darkness surrounding the house grows stronger, Gemma begins preparing herself for the most dangerous journey of her life, entering the further by choice, knowing that this time she may not be able to return alone. Gemma finally reaches the point where she can no longer pretend that the supernatural events are happening by accident. The more she investigates her family's history, the clearer it becomes that her connection to the further has been present for much longer than she realized. Her childhood memories begin returning with greater clarity, and she starts remembering moments that she had deliberately pushed out of her mind. She remembers the strange atmosphere of the house, the nights when her mother seemed to be fighting something invisible, and the feeling that there was always someone else present even when the rooms were empty. As an adult, Gemma had convinced herself that those memories were simply the product of a frightened child, but now she understands that the child she once was may actually have been seeing the supernatural world. This realization changes the way she looks at everything around her. The walls of the house no longer feel like ordinary walls. The darkness in the hallways no longer feels like ordinary darkness. And even the quiet moments with Maya carry an uncomfortable sense that something is watching them. Gemma begins to understand that the further has been connected to her family for generations, and the reason the entities are so interested in her is because her ability is stronger than anything they have encountered before. At the same time, Gemma starts to realize that her ability does not work simply because she wants it to. Her emotional state appears to influence the connection. Fear, grief, anger, and desperation can all make the boundary between the two worlds weaker. This becomes extremely dangerous because Gemma is constantly afraid for Maya every time she worries that something might happen to her daughter. The supernatural presence seems to become stronger. Gemma understands that she needs to remain calm, but remaining calm becomes almost impossible when the people she loves are being threatened. The entities seem to recognize this weakness and begin using Maya as a way to manipulate her. Instead of attacking Gemma directly all the time, they create situations that make her believe Maya is in danger. Gemma rushes to protect her daughter, and in doing so she sometimes comes closer to the further than she intended. It becomes a vicious cycle. The more frightened Gemma becomes, the stronger her connection grows, and the stronger her connection becomes, the easier it is for the entities to reach her. Maya also begins asking more questions about the strange things happening around them. Gemma tries to give simple explanations, but Maya is perceptive enough to realize that her mother is hiding something. She notices that Gemma becomes nervous whenever certain subjects are mentioned, and she senses that the house contains something her mother does not want her to discover. Eventually, Maya begins describing experiences that are impossible for Gemma to dismiss. She talks about seeing figures that disappear when she looks at them directly, hearing sounds coming from places where nobody is present, and feeling as though someone is standing nearby even when she is completely alone. Gemma becomes terrified because these experiences are too similar to the things she herself experienced as a child. The possibility that Maya has inherited the family ability is no longer just a theory. Gemma begins to believe that her daughter may already be able to sense the further. Rather than allowing Maya to continue discovering these things on her own, Gemma begins explaining that there are certain experiences that cannot always be understood through ordinary logic. She does not immediately tell her daughter everything because she fears that giving Maya too much information could make the supernatural connection stronger. But she also knows that complete silence could be dangerous. Maya needs to understand that if she sees something strange, she must never blindly follow it. Gemma's greatest fear is that one of the entities will appear to Maya in a familiar form and convince her to enter a dangerous place. The further has the ability to manipulate appearances and memories, and Gemma knows that a child could easily be deceived by something pretending to be a friendly person. Meanwhile, Cyrus becomes more confident in his attempts to manipulate Gemma. He understands that direct violence may not be the most effective method of controlling her. Instead, he uses the memories that Gemma has spent years trying to forget. He forces her to confront the pain surrounding Ingrid and the complicated emotions she still carries toward her mother. Gemma wants to believe that Ingrid failed her because she did not love her enough, but another possibility is becoming impossible to ignore. Ingrid may have been fighting a supernatural battle that Gemma was too young to understand. This creates a painful conflict inside Gemma. She has spent years blaming her mother for the loneliness of her childhood, and now she has to consider whether Ingrid was actually another victim of the further. The more Gemma learns, the more she realizes that the further can exploit unresolved emotions. Spirits and demons do not simply attack the body. They can use memories, guilt, grief, and fear to weaken a person's ability to distinguish reality from illusion. Gemma therefore becomes cautious whenever she sees someone from her past. She understands that the appearance of a familiar face does not necessarily mean that the person she remembers is actually there. Cyrus can use emotional manipulation to make her lower her defenses, and Gemma knows that if she trusts the wrong apparition, She could accidentally give an entity access to the physical world. One of the most frightening discoveries is that bringing something back from the further is easier than Gemma originally believed. Her connection is powerful enough that an entity does not necessarily need to force its way through. Gemma herself can unintentionally provide the pathway. This means that her emotions can become a weapon against her. If she becomes desperate enough to save Maya, she might open the doorway without realizing it. Gemma begins to understand why the entities are not simply trying to kill her. They need her alive. They need her ability. And they need her to believe that she has no other choice. As the supernatural pressure increases, Gemma seeks guidance from Elise. Elise explains that the further can never be treated as an ordinary place. Entering it requires understanding that the rules of reality are different there. Time, distance, memory, and identity can all become distorted. A person can enter believing that they know exactly where they are going and still become completely lost. Elise warns Gemma that the greatest danger is not necessarily the most terrifying creature she encounters. The greatest danger is losing her sense of who she is. If Gemma allows fear to control her, the further can use that fear to trap her. If she allows grief to control her, the spirits can use her grief to deceive her. And if she allows her love for Maya to become desperation, Cyrus can use that love to manipulate her into doing exactly what he wants. Gemma begins preparing herself for another journey into the further, but this time she does not want to enter simply to search for answers. She wants to understand Cyrus's plan. She wants to know why he is so interested in her ability, and what he intends to do if he successfully crosses into the living world. She also wants to discover whether there is a way to permanently close the connection. The answers may exist somewhere inside the further, but finding them means voluntarily entering the realm that has been haunting her family for years. Gemma knows that she may encounter spirits who will attempt to confuse her, and she knows that Cyrus will be waiting for her. Nevertheless, she decides that running away is no longer an option. Before entering the further, Gemma spends time with Maya and tries to make her understand how much she loves her. She does not tell Maya that she is afraid she may not return. Instead, she tries to remain calm and reassuring. This moment becomes important because Gemma's entire motivation has always been connected to protecting her daughter. She is not entering the further because she wants to prove that she is powerful. She is entering because she believes that confronting the darkness directly may be the only way to stop it from reaching Maya. For the first time, Gemma accepts that she cannot protect her daughter by pretending that the supernatural world does not exist. She must face it. When Gemma finally crosses into the further, the experience is more intense than anything she has previously experienced. The familiar world disappears, replaced by a distorted landscape filled with darkness and echoes of the past. Places that should be familiar become twisted versions of themselves. Gemma hears voices calling to her, some of them sounding like people she knows. She understands that the further is attempting to make her question what is real. She continues moving forward, reminding herself that her goal is Maya, and that she cannot allow herself to be distracted by false memories. As she moves deeper into the realm, Gemma encounters spirits who appear to know who she is. Some seem frightened of her ability, while others appear interested in using her. She realizes that word has spread throughout the further about the woman who can bring entities into the living world. Gemma is no longer an unknown visitor. She has become someone important to the supernatural inhabitants. This realization frightens her because it means she cannot rely on surprise. The entities know what she can do, and some of them may already be planning how to exploit her. Eventually, Gemma senses that Cyrus is nearby. He does not immediately attack. Instead, he begins speaking to her and trying to convince her that he understands her better than anyone else does. He reminds her of the pain she experienced as a child and suggests that her mother may have known the truth all along. He attempts to make Gemma believe that the supernatural world is not necessarily her enemy. According to his manipulation, the further is simply another reality, and Gemma's ability could allow her to move freely between both worlds. He suggests that she could use her gift to communicate with the dead and perhaps even recover something she lost. But Gemma recognizes that there is something dangerous behind his words. Cyrus does not want to help her. He wants access to her power, Gemma refuses to surrender to his manipulation, but Cyrus begins revealing just how much control he has inside the further. The environment changes around her, and memories from her childhood begin appearing as though they are happening again. Gemma sees herself as a frightened child, sees her mother struggling, and experiences the loneliness she felt all those years ago. Cyrus wants her to believe that she has always been powerless. He wants her to think that everything bad that happened to her was inevitable. But Gemma begins realizing that her memories can also become a source of strength. She survived her childhood. She became a mother. She built a life for Maya. She has already escaped the darkness once, and she refuses to let it control her again. Back in the physical world, however, Maya begins experiencing an increasingly dangerous supernatural presence. The connection that Gemma has opened is affecting the house even while she is inside the further. Maya realizes that her mother is no longer physically present and begins to understand that something is wrong. The house becomes strangely quiet, and the supernatural presence becomes more noticeable. Maya's fear grows, but she also begins to sense that she possesses a connection of her own. Instead of simply being a helpless child waiting for her mother to return, Maya begins responding to the supernatural environment around her. This creates a dangerous situation because Cyrus now has two possible connections to the living world. Gemma remains the primary doorway, but Maya may possess the same ability in a developing form. If Cyrus can manipulate both mother and daughter, he could potentially create a much stronger bridge between the two worlds. Gemma begins sensing that something is happening to Maya even from inside the further. Her maternal connection becomes so strong that she realizes her daughter is in danger. This is exactly the emotional pressure Cyrus has been waiting for. He wants Gemma to become desperate enough to lose control. Gemma realizes that she has been walking into a trap. The entire journey through the further may have been designed to separate her from Maya. Cyrus did not necessarily need to defeat Gemma physically. He only needed to create a situation in which she would willingly enter the further, while Maya remained vulnerable. In the real world, Gemma now understands that she must find a way back before the connection becomes permanent, but the route home is no longer obvious. The further has changed around her, and the entities are closing in. With Maya now facing danger and Gemma trapped inside the supernatural realm, the conflict enters a new stage. Gemma must find the strength to escape the further while resisting Cyrus's manipulation. At the same time, Maya must confront the strange ability beginning to awaken inside her. Mother and daughter are separated by two worlds, yet their supernatural connection is becoming the very thing that may allow them to find one another. Gemma realizes that the only way to save Maya may be to use the power that she has spent the entire story fearing. She must turn her connection to the further against the entities that are trying to control her, and somewhere between the living world and the realm of lost souls, Cyrus is preparing for the moment when Gemma's fear will finally become strong enough to open the door completely. Gemma's situation becomes much more serious when the strange figures around the neighborhood begin to reveal themselves as part of a larger supernatural threat. These figures are not ordinary people, and their presence is connected to the further and to Cyrus. Gemma notices them appearing at a distance, watching the house and observing her movements. Their behavior is disturbing because they do not behave like normal ghosts that simply appear and disappear. They seem to have a purpose, and that purpose is connected to Gemma's unusual ability. At the same time, Gemma's nightmares become more intense. What she initially believes are ordinary nightmares begin to feel completely real. She wakes up frightened and confused, sometimes unable to determine whether she has actually been asleep. The boundary between dreams and reality becomes increasingly difficult for her to understand. These experiences also begin making her behave in ways that remind her of Ingrid, which frightens Gemma because she has spent her entire life trying not to become like her mother. New York Post +1. During one particularly important supernatural experience, Gemma encounters Elise Rainier inside the further. Elise immediately understands that Gemma is dealing with something unusual. She recognizes that Gemma is not simply another person who can enter the further through astral projection. There is something fundamentally different about Gemma's gift. Elise explains that Gemma possesses a rare ability that allows her to move objects and entities between the further and the physical world. This makes Gemma incredibly dangerous from the perspective of the entities trapped inside that realm. Normally, the further is a place from which these spirits cannot freely escape. They can frighten or manipulate people, but they remain bound to their supernatural realm. Gemma's ability changes that rule because she can potentially become a bridge between both worlds. Common sense media +1. Gemma is initially overwhelmed by this information. She has spent her entire life believing that something was wrong with her family, and now she discovers that the strange experiences of her childhood may have been connected to a genuine supernatural gift. Elise helps her understand that her mother, Ingrid, may have possessed the same ability. This explains why Ingrid behaved so strangely at night and why Gemma's childhood was filled with experiences she could never understand. Ingrid may not simply have been suffering from ordinary psychological problems. She may have been struggling with a connection to the further that she could not control. Gemma now sees her mother's history from a completely different perspective. The woman she once remembered only as frightened, confused, and unstable may actually have been fighting something invisible that eventually overwhelmed her. Gemma's discovery becomes even more frightening because she begins realizing that the ability may have passed down to Maya as well. Maya is still young, but she has already begun noticing things that other people cannot see. She senses strange presences around the house and appears unusually sensitive to the supernatural activity surrounding her mother. Gemma tries to protect her daughter by keeping as much of the truth away from her as possible, but the supernatural world does not allow them to remain separate. The entities have already discovered Gemma, and now Maya is becoming part of the equation. Gemma understands that if Maya possesses the same gift, then she could become another doorway into the further. That possibility makes Gemma even more desperate to stop Cyrus before he can reach her daughter. At this point, Gemma seeks help from Claire, a tattoo artist who possesses the ability to channel Elise. Claire becomes an important connection between Gemma and the supernatural knowledge that Elise has accumulated. Through Claire, Gemma is able to receive guidance from Elise in the physical world, rather than relying entirely on her dangerous journeys into the further. Claire helps Gemma understand that her ability has a name and a purpose. Gemma is essentially a courier, someone capable of transporting objects and supernatural entities between the further and the real world. The discovery gives Gemma a clearer understanding of what is happening, but it also makes her situation more frightening. If she is a courier, then the entities have a reason to pursue her. They do not simply want her dead. They need her alive and conscious so that they can use her gift. Common sense media. Gemma's relationship with Mick also becomes important as the danger grows. Nick is a police officer and someone Gemma trusts, and unlike many people who become involved in supernatural stories, he has a practical way of looking at dangerous situations. He wants to protect Gemma and Maya, but he initially has difficulty understanding the supernatural explanation for what is happening. Gemma has to convince him that the threat cannot be handled like an ordinary criminal investigation. The strange people around the neighborhood, the nightmares, the disappearances, and the supernatural activity are all connected. Nick eventually realizes that Gemma is not simply frightened or imagining things. Something is genuinely coming after her family. The group begins trying to understand Cyrus's real objective. They discover that he is not acting alone. The mysterious figures appearing around Gemma's home are connected to him and serve as his followers. Cyrus wants to exploit Gemma's ability to bring things out of the further. His larger plan involves using her as a doorway through which trapped souls can return to the living world. The danger therefore becomes much larger than one family being haunted. If Cyrus succeeds, the boundary separating the further from the real world could effectively collapse. The dead and supernatural entities could begin crossing over, turning the ordinary world into an extension of the further. Gemma realizes that she is standing between the living world and something that could potentially overwhelm it. Common sense media +1. As Gemma learns more about Cyrus, she begins to understand why he has been manipulating her rather than simply attacking her. He knows that Gemma's strongest motivation is Maya. If he can create a situation in which Maya is threatened, Gemma will do almost anything to save her. Cyrus wants to use that love against her. He wants Gemma to willingly use her gift instead of forcing her to use it. This distinction is crucial because Gemma's ability becomes more powerful when she intentionally opens the connection. If she consciously chooses to bring something from the further into the real world, the doorway becomes stronger. Cyrus therefore attempts to push Gemma into a situation where using her ability becomes the only apparent way to protect her daughter. The supernatural attacks around the house become increasingly direct. Gemma starts seeing the strange figures much closer than before, and Maya becomes increasingly frightened. The family can no longer pretend that staying inside the house will protect them. The place that Gemma originally chose, because she wanted to create happy memories, has effectively become the center of the supernatural invasion. The past and present have merged. The same house that witnessed Ingrid's suffering is now witnessing Gemma's battle with the further. For Gemma, this creates an emotional conflict because she begins wondering whether returning to the house was a mistake. She wanted to reclaim her childhood, but instead she may have reopened the very door that destroyed her mother's life. Gemma also begins realizing that her nightmares are not random. They are connected to her ability to travel into the further. Whenever she dreams, she may actually be entering that realm. This explains why the dreams feel so vivid and why the people she encounters sometimes seem to know things about her that they could not possibly know. The further is using her sleeping state as another way to pull her across the boundary. Gemma can no longer trust sleep as a safe place. Even when she closes her eyes and believes she is resting, she may actually be walking through a supernatural world where Cyrus and his followers can reach her. One of the most disturbing aspects of Gemma's gift is that physical objects can also be transported. This ability becomes a crucial part of the story because it proves that Gemma's connection is much more powerful than ordinary astral projection. At one point, she is able to transport a television into the further almost instinctively. The event demonstrates that the barrier between the two worlds is not an absolute wall for her. If an ordinary object can cross the boundary, then a supernatural entity can potentially do the same thing in the opposite direction. Gemma realizes that this is exactly what Cyrus wants. Phrasemaker. The situation becomes increasingly dangerous when Maya's own connection to the further is used as part of Cyrus's plan. Gemma realizes that she may not be the only doorway. Her daughter can potentially become another point of contact between the worlds. This is especially terrifying because Maya does not have Gemma's experience or understanding. She is still a child and may not recognize when something is pretending to be friendly. Cyrus and his followers can exploit that innocence, creating the possibility that Maya might unknowingly help them cross into the real world. Gemma's determination therefore changes. Earlier, she was trying to understand her ability because she wanted answers about her childhood. Now she understands that she has to use that ability deliberately. She cannot keep running from the further. She has to find a way to control the doorway rather than allowing Cyrus to control it through her. Elisa's guidance becomes increasingly important because Gemma needs to remain mentally focused while entering a realm designed to confuse and frighten her. Elise repeatedly reminds her that fear can become a trap. If Gemma allows herself to lose control, the further can manipulate her perception and make her believe that she is trapped when there may still be a way out. Meanwhile, Cyrus and his followers move closer to the final stage of their plan. Their goal is to use Gemma and Maya to bring the trapped supernatural beings into the real world. The more Gemma struggles, the more the boundary weakens. The irony is that every attempt she makes to save her family may actually help the enemy. She is caught in a situation where doing nothing could allow Maya to be taken, while acting could strengthen the supernatural doorway. This forces Gemma to think differently. Instead of fighting Cyrus according to his rules, she must find a way to make him believe that he has control while secretly preparing to turn his own plan against him. By the end of this part, Gemma understands that the conflict is heading toward a direct confrontation. Cyrus has identified her as the key to escaping the further, while Gemma has finally understood that her gift can be used in both directions. She may be able to bring something out, but that does not necessarily mean she has to leave it in the real world. If she can master the ability, she may also be able to send entities back. That possibility gives her a new strategy, but it is an extremely dangerous one because she will have to get close enough to Cyrus to use it. At the same time, Maya is becoming increasingly important to the supernatural plan, and Gemma realizes that the final battle will not simply be about defeating a demon. It will be about controlling the doorway between two worlds before that doorway becomes permanent. Gemma now understands that the greatest danger is not simply the presence of spirits inside the house, but the fact that the boundary between the further and the living world is becoming weaker. Because of her own ability, she has spent most of her life believing that supernatural experiences were something she needed to escape. But she finally accepts that running away will not protect Maya. If anything, avoiding the truth has allowed the situation to become more dangerous. Gemma therefore begins approaching her ability differently. Instead of seeing herself only as a victim, she starts thinking about how she can control the connection and use it against the entities that are pursuing her. She knows that Cyrus wants her frightened and emotionally unstable because fear makes it easier for him to manipulate her. For that reason, Gemma tries to remain focused on one simple goal, keeping Maya alive and preventing anything from from permanently entering their world. But this is easier said than done because the supernatural forces have already learned how deeply Gemma cares about her daughter. As Gemma continues investigating the history of the house, she discovers more pieces of the story that her mother never told her. The old home contains memories of Ingrid's own encounters with the supernatural, and Gemma begins realizing that many of the strange incidents she remembers from childhood were connected to Ingrid's attempts to control her gift. Ingrid had apparently understood that certain entities could use a person's fear and grief as a pathway into the living world. She tried to protect Gemma by keeping the supernatural subject hidden, but hiding the truth only made Gemma more confused when she was young. Now Gemma understands why her mother sometimes seemed terrified of ordinary things. Ingrid was not necessarily afraid of the house itself. She was afraid of what could enter the house through the connection to the further. This revelation leaves Gemma with mixed emotions. Part of her still feels anger toward her mother for failing to give her the childhood she deserved, but another part begins to feel sympathy. Ingrid may have been trying to protect her daughter without knowing how to explain the danger the discovery also makes Gemma worrying about Maya. If Ingrid's ability passed to Gemma, and Gemma's ability is now beginning to appear in Maya, then the supernatural connection may be a family inheritance that cannot simply be stopped. Gemma does not want Maya to grow up believing that her gift makes her abnormal or cursed. She wants her daughter to understand that possessing an unusual ability does not automatically make her evil. The danger comes from the entities that want to exploit that ability. This distinction becomes extremely important because Gemma realizes that she cannot simply tell Maya to ignore what she sees. If Maya really can perceive the further, then she needs to learn how to protect herself from it. Gemma begins preparing her daughter emotionally, telling her that strange things may happen and that she should never follow voices or figures simply because they appear familiar. Maya begins to understand that her mother is not imagining the danger. The relationship between Gemma and Maya becomes the emotional center of the story as the supernatural threat grows. Maya senses that her mother is hiding how frightened she really is, and she becomes determined to help rather than simply remain protected. Gemma initially refuses because she believes that Maya is too young to become involved, but Maya's growing connection to the further makes that impossible. There are moments when Maya seems to know things that she could not possibly know, and there are times when she reacts to invisible presences before Gemma notices them herself. This forces Gemma to recognize that Maya may actually be able to sense the supernatural world more clearly than she does. Instead of being only a victim, Maya could become an important part of the struggle against Cyrus. At the same time, that ability makes her an even more valuable target. Cyrus understands the bond between mother and daughter and begins using it to manipulate Gemma. He makes it appear as though Maya is constantly in danger, forcing Gemma to react emotionally. Whenever Gemma becomes frightened, her connection to the further becomes stronger. Cyrus wants her to lose control because a completely open emotional connection can create a stronger passage between the worlds. Gemma slowly recognizes the pattern. The attacks are not always designed to physically hurt her. Some are designed to make her afraid enough to open the doorway herself. Once she realizes this, she becomes more careful. She starts questioning every supernatural vision before reacting to it. If she sees Maya in danger, she asks herself whether she is actually seeing her daughter or whether something from the further is creating an illusion. This becomes especially difficult when Gemma encounters images of people from her past. The further knows exactly how to imitate familiar faces. It can take memories and turn them into traps. Gemma sees versions of her mother and is tempted to believe that Ingrid is finally reaching out to her. For years, Gemma has carried unresolved feelings toward Ingrid, including anger, sadness, and guilt. The possibility of speaking to her mother again is emotionally overwhelming, but Gemma remembers Elise's warnings and refuses to immediately trust what she sees. She realizes that the further can use her desire for closure against her. If an entity wants to control her, pretending to be Ingrid would be one of the easiest ways to gain her trust. Gemma therefore begins separating genuine memories from supernatural manipulation. Her experiences inside the further also reveal that the realm is not simply a place filled with darkness. It contains fragments of the lives of those who have become trapped there. Places, memories, and emotions overlap, creating an environment that constantly changes. Gemma can move through familiar locations that suddenly transform into distorted versions of themselves. A hallway from her childhood can become endless. A bedroom can appear abandoned, and a familiar voice can come from somewhere completely impossible. The further seems to respond to her emotions, making the experience even more difficult. The more frightened she becomes, the more unstable the environment appears. Gemma therefore understands that maintaining control of her emotions is not simply about being brave. It is a survival strategy. While Gemma struggles inside the supernatural realm, the danger in the physical world continues to grow. Maya begins seeing signs that something is trying to reach her. At first, she attempts to follow the instructions her mother gave her. She avoids responding to strange voices and refuses to approach figures that appear unexpectedly. But eventually the supernatural presence becomes too strong to ignore. Maya realizes that whatever is trying to reach her is not simply outside the house. It is connected to her family. She begins having visions connected to her mother and the further, and these experiences make her believe that Gemma may be trapped somewhere she cannot escape from. Maya's instinct is to find her mother, even though doing so could put her directly in danger. The situation forces the adults around Gemma to take the supernatural threat seriously. Nick begins understanding that ordinary methods will not be enough. He has seen enough evidence to know that something impossible is happening, and he realizes that Gemma's warnings about the house and the further are genuine. Instead of treating her experiences as fear or imagination, he begins helping her protect Maya. This gives Gemma some emotional support because she no longer has to face the entire situation alone. However, even with another person helping her, the supernatural threat remains extremely difficult to fight because ordinary physical weapons have little effect on entities that do not completely belong to the physical world. Gemma eventually realizes that Cyrus's greatest weakness may be his dependence on her ability. He can manipulate the further, frighten people, and control other entities, but he cannot create the same bridge between worlds that Gemma can create. He needs her. Elise becomes crucial to this strategy. She reminds Gemma that courage does not mean eliminating fear. Courage means refusing to allow fear to make the decision. Gemma finally begins understanding the lesson that her mother may never have been able to learn. The further becomes powerful when people allow it to control their emotions. Ingrid may have been overwhelmed because she was forced to face the supernatural world without enough understanding or support. Gemma now has the opportunity to break that pattern. She can acknowledge her fear without allowing it to control her. More importantly, she can protect Maya without teaching her that her supernatural ability is something to be ashamed of. Gemma then prepares for another journey into the further. This time, however, she enters with a specific purpose. She is not searching randomly for answers, and she is not allowing Cyrus to guide her. She intends to find the point where the supernatural entities are preparing to cross into the living world. She knows that Cyrus will try to stop her, but she also understands that he cannot simply destroy her without losing his opportunity to escape. That means Gemma has something he needs. For the first time, she begins to see herself not merely as the hunted, woman, but as someone who possesses a power the enemy desperately requires. Inside the further, Gemma encounters increasingly disturbing manifestations of her past. She sees the house as it appeared during her childhood and watches fragments of memories play out around her. She sees herself as a frightened little girl and remembers moments when she believed her mother had abandoned her. But now she notices details that she never noticed before. Ingrid was frightened too. She was not ignoring the supernatural danger. She was trying to understand it. Gemma begins to feel compassion for her mother, and this emotional shift becomes important because the further has been feeding on Gemma's unresolved anger. By accepting the complexity of her relationship with Ingrid, Gemma begins weakening one of the emotional traps that Cyrus has been using against her. Cyrus then appears and tries a different strategy. Instead of threatening Gemma, he attempts to convince her that he can give her exactly what she wants. He suggests that the further does not have to be a prison. He tells her that people who are lost can be reached, memories can be recovered, and the dead do not necessarily have to remain separated from the living. For someone like Gemma, who has spent years wondering about her mother, those promises are extremely tempting. Cyrus knows that if he can make Gemma believe she has a chance to repair the past, she may willingly cooperate with him. But Gemma finally sees through the manipulation. She realizes that Cyrus is not interested in giving her freedom. He wants to use her grief as a key. If she accepts his offer, she will be opening the door for him and countless other entities. Gemma refuses to make that sacrifice. She understands that protecting Maya means accepting that some things cannot be changed. She cannot undo her childhood. She cannot bring the dead back to the way they were, and she cannot erase every painful memory. What she can do is prevent the same darkness from destroying Maya's future. This realization gives Gemma a new kind of strength. Instead of fighting the further with panic, she begins moving through it with purpose. She understands that her connection to the realm does not have to be controlled by Cyrus. She can decide when the doorway opens and, if she is strong enough, when it closes. But controlling that doorway will require enormous concentration. One mistake could allow Cyrus to cross over completely. Gemma therefore prepares herself for the moment when she will have to confront him directly. Back in the living world, Maya also begins taking a stand. She understands that her mother is fighting for her, and she refuses to remain completely helpless. Her own connection to the further allows her to sense when something is approaching. She begins using that sensitivity to recognize false appearances and supernatural traps. Although Maya is still young, she starts demonstrating the same courage that Gemma has been developing. Mother and daughter are separated physically, but their supernatural connection allows them to sense one another across the boundary between worlds. Cyrus realizes that his plan is becoming more difficult. Gemma is no longer reacting exactly as he expects, and Maya is becoming aware of the supernatural manipulation around her. He therefore begins preparing for a more aggressive attack. His objective remains the same: use Gemma's ability to create a permanent path between the further and the living world. But now he needs to overcome both Gemma's resistance and Maya's growing awareness. The conflict becomes a battle of wills as much as a supernatural confrontation. Gemma finally understands that she must return to the physical world before Cyrus can complete his plan. But escaping the further is not as simple as finding a doorway and walking through it. She must navigate the distorted realm while resisting the entities trying to stop her. Every step becomes a test of her ability to distinguish reality from illusion. She hears Maya calling for her, but she cannot immediately know whether the voice is genuine. She sees familiar places, but they may be traps. She remembers her mother, but the figure appearing before her may not actually be Ingrid. Gemma has learned the most important lesson of the further. The realm can imitate almost anything, but it cannot completely reproduce the love and determination that connect real people. As Gemma moves toward the boundary separating the two worlds, Cyrus follows her. He finally abandons much of his manipulation and makes it clear that he intends to use her power whether she agrees or not. The confrontation becomes inevitable. Gemma knows that if Cyrus reaches the physical world through her, he may never be forced back. She also knows that Maya is waiting on the other side. For the first time, Gemma stops thinking about escaping simply to survive. She begins thinking about how she can turn the connection itself into a weapon. The stage is now set for the most dangerous part of the story. Gemma has discovered the truth about her family, accepted her supernatural ability, and learned that Maya may share the same gift. Cyrus has revealed his intention to use Gemma as a doorway, and the further is pressing closer to the living world. The house has become the center of the conflict, while Gemma and Maya are connected across the boundary separating life from the supernatural realm. Gemma knows that the final confrontation will require her to use the very power she once feared. If she succeeds, she may finally break the cycle that began with Ingrid. But if she fails, Cyrus and the other entities could gain access to the living world, turning Gemma's gift into the doorway through which the further itself comes pouring into reality. The situation reaches a critical stage when Gemma finally understands that Cyrus has been manipulating the entire family through the connection to the further. His objective is not simply to frighten Gemma or take control of her body. He wants to use her unique ability to bring the dead and supernatural entities into the living world, and he has gathered followers in the further who are waiting for their opportunity to escape. Gemma realizes that Cyrus has made promises to these followers, telling them that he can help them leave the further and return to the physical world. This explains why so many entities have become interested in her. They are not simply attacking her out of hatred. They believe Gemma is the person who can give them the freedom they have been waiting for. The discovery makes Gemma understand that she is standing between an entire group of trapped supernatural beings and the world of the living. If she loses control, the consequences could be much larger than the destruction of her own family. At the same time, Gemma's house begins to feel less like a home and more like a place where two realities are colliding. The familiar ruins are still physically present, but the atmosphere has changed completely. Strange shadows appear in places where nobody should be standing. Objects move without explanation, and the presence of the further seems to become stronger with every passing moment. Gemma realizes that the entities are already beginning to cross the boundary. What was once an invisible supernatural realm is now becoming physically connected to her home. The terrifying part is that Gemma herself has unintentionally helped create this connection. Her ability allows her to bring things from the further into the real world, and the entities are exploiting that power. She begins to understand that the house is not simply haunted, it is becoming a doorway. Maya is now in even greater danger because the entities realize that she is connected to Gemma. Since Maya possesses the same unusual family gift, she can also become a pathway between the two worlds. Gemma desperately tries to keep her daughter away from the supernatural activity, but the entities are becoming more aggressive. Maya begins seeing things that her mother cannot always see, and she starts sensing when something from the further is nearby, instead of remaining completely frightened. However, Maya begins learning how to recognize the difference between an ordinary person and a supernatural presence. Her mother's warnings have prepared her for this moment. Maya knows that if something appears in a familiar form, she cannot automatically trust it. The supernatural entities can imitate people, voices, and memories, and Maya understands that they are trying to make her lower her guard. Gemma eventually realizes that Maya's gift may be the key to Cyrus's plan. The connection between mother and daughter is unusually powerful, and the entities want to use that connection to make the doorway between the worlds stronger. Gemma understands that this is why Cyrus has been so interested in both of them. He does not need only Gemma, he needs the family connection itself. The abilities, passed through the generations, have created something that the entities have never had access to before. Gemma can transport things from the further, and Maya may be capable of strengthening the connection without even understanding how powerful she is. Cyrus therefore begins focusing on Maya as a way to pressure Gemma into surrendering. Inside the further, Gemma comes closer to discovering how Cyrus intends to use her. She encounters the followers who have gathered around him, and their desperation becomes obvious. They have been trapped in this realm for a long time, and are willing to do almost anything to escape. Cyrus has convinced them that Gemma is their salvation. To them, she is not simply a woman they need to frighten. She is the doorway they have been waiting for. Gemma realizes that if she manages to stop Cyrus, she will also be preventing countless other entities from entering the living world. But she also understands that many of these beings may attack her simply because they believe she is preventing them from obtaining freedom. Cyrus tries once again to convince Gemma that he can give her what she wants. He uses the memory of Ingrid to make his offer more personal. Gemma has spent years wondering whether she misunderstood her mother and whether she could have saved her. Cyrus uses that uncertainty to create an illusion in which Gemma is given the chance to confront her past. For a moment, Gemma is tempted to believe that she can finally speak to Ingrid and understand what really happened, but she slowly recognizes that the further is using her grief as a weapon. The image of her mother is not necessarily a genuine reunion. It is a trap designed to make Gemma emotionally vulnerable. She refuses to allow her desire for answers to put Maya at risk. This becomes a major turning point for Gemma because she finally accepts that she cannot change what happened in the past. She cannot undo the pain of her childhood, and she cannot bring her mother back simply because she misses her. The only thing she can control is what happens to Maya. Gemma decides that she will not sacrifice her daughter's future to repair her own past. This decision gives her greater control over her ability. Instead of opening the connection because she is frightened or desperate, she begins using it intentionally. For the first time, Gemma understands that her power is not simply a curse. It can become a weapon against the very entities that have been hunting her. While Gemma is struggling inside the further, Maya is forced to deal with the supernatural threat in the house. She hears her mother's voice calling for her, but she remembers the warning that voices can be deceptive. She does not immediately follow it. Instead, she watches carefully and realizes that something is trying to lure her toward a particular part of the house. Maya understands that the entity wants her to act emotionally. It wants her to become frightened enough to use her own ability. She resists, and this resistance becomes extremely important. Maya is beginning to understand her own supernatural sensitivity, even though she is still too young to completely control it. The entities become increasingly aggressive. When they realize that Maya is resisting them, the house begins filling with supernatural activity, and Maya is forced to hide and protect herself. She knows that her mother is somewhere connected to the further and that she may be the only person capable of bringing Gemma back. Instead of simply waiting for help, Maya begins trying to reach her mother through their shared connection. She focuses on the memories they share, especially moments when Gemma made her feel safe. These memories become a kind of emotional anchor that helps Maya establish contact with Gemma across the boundary. Gemma senses Maya calling to her from the living world. This moment becomes one of the strongest emotional points in the story because Gemma realizes that her daughter is not simply waiting for rescue. Maya is actively trying to reach her. Gemma follows that connection and begins moving toward the boundary between the further and reality. But Cyrus realizes what is happening and attempts to stop her. He knows that if Gemma returns to the physical world with control over her ability, his plan may fail. He therefore sends his followers after her. The situation reaches a critical stage when Gemma finally understands that Cyrus has been manipulating the entire family through the connection to the further. His objective is not simply to frighten Gemma or take control of her body. He wants to use her unique ability to bring the dead and supernatural entities into the living world. And he has gathered followers in the further who are waiting for their opportunity to escape. Gemma realizes that Cyrus has made promises to these followers, telling them that he can help them leave the further and return to the physical world. This explains why so many entities have become interested in her. They are not simply attacking her out of hatred. They believe Gemma is the person who can give them the freedom they have been waiting for. The discovery makes Gemma understand that she is standing between an entire group of trapped supernatural beings and the world of the living. If she loses control, the consequences could be much larger than the destruction of her own family. At the same time, Gemma's house begins to feel less like a home and more like a place where two realities are colliding. The familiar rooms are still physically present, but the atmosphere has changed completely. Strange shadows appear in places where nobody should be standing. Objects move without explanation, and the presence of the further seems to become stronger with every passing moment. Gemma realizes that the entities are already beginning to cross the boundary. What was once an invisible supernatural realm is now becoming physically connected to her home. The terrifying part is that Gemma herself has unintentionally helped create this connection. Her ability allows her to bring things from the further into the real world. and the entities are exploiting that power. She begins to understand that the house is not simply haunted, it is becoming a doorway. Maya is now in even greater danger because the entities realize that she is connected to Gemma, since Maya possesses the same unusual family gift. She can also become a pathway between the two worlds. Gemma desperately tries to keep her daughter away from the supernatural activity, but the entities are becoming more aggressive. Maya begins seeing things that her mother cannot always see, and she starts sensing when something from the further is nearby, instead of remaining completely frightened. However, Maya begins learning how to recognize the difference between an ordinary person and a supernatural presence. Her mother's warnings have prepared her for this moment. Maya knows that if something appears in a familiar form, she cannot automatically trust it. The supernatural entities can imitate people, voices, and memories, and Maya understands that they are trying to make her lower her guard. Gemma eventually realizes that Maya's gift may be the key to Cyrus's plan. The connection between mother and daughter is unusually powerful, and the entities want to use that connection to make the doorway between the worlds stronger. Gemma understands that this is why Cyrus has been so interested in both of them. He does not need only Gemma, he needs the family connection itself. The abilities, passed through the generations, have created something that the entities have never had access to before. Gemma can transport things from the further, and Maya may be capable of strengthening the connection without even understanding how powerful she is. Cyrus therefore begins focusing on Maya as a way to pressure Gemma into surrendering. Inside the further, Gemma comes closer to discovering how Cyrus intends to use her. She encounters the followers who have gathered around him, and their desperation becomes obvious. They have been trapped in this realm for a long time, and are willing to do almost anything to escape. Cyrus has convinced them that Gemma is their salvation. To them, she is not simply a woman they need to frighten. She is the doorway they have been waiting for. Gemma realizes that if she manages to stop Cyrus, she will also be preventing countless other entities from entering the living world. But she also understands that many of these beings may attack her simply because they believe she is preventing them from obtaining freedom. Cyrus tries once again to convince Gemma that he can give her what she wants. He uses the memory of Ingrid to make his offer more personal. Gemma has spent years wondering whether she misunderstood her mother and whether she could have saved her. Cyrus uses that uncertainty to create an illusion in which Gemma is given the chance to confront her past. For a moment, Gemma is tempted to believe that she can finally speak to Ingrid and understand what really happened, but she slowly recognizes that the further is using her grief as a weapon. The image of her mother is not necessarily a genuine reunion. It is a trap designed to make Gemma emotionally vulnerable. She refuses to allow her desire for answers to put Maya at risk. This becomes a major turning point for Gemma because she finally accepts that she cannot change what happened in the past. She cannot undo the pain of her childhood, and she cannot bring her mother back simply because she misses her. The only thing she can control is what happens to Maya. Gemma decides that she will not sacrifice her daughter's future to repair her own past. This decision gives her greater control over her ability. Instead of opening the connection because she is frightened or desperate, she begins using it intentionally. For the first time, Gemma understands that her power is not simply a curse. It can become a weapon against the very entities that have been hunting her. While Gemma is struggling inside the further, Maya is forced to deal with the supernatural threat in the house. She hears her mother's voice calling for her, but she remembers the warning that voices can be deceptive. She does not immediately follow it. Instead, she watches carefully and realizes that something is trying to lure her toward a particular part of the house. Maya understands that the entity wants her to act emotionally. It wants her to become frightened enough to use her own ability. She resists, and this resistance becomes extremely important. Maya is beginning to understand her own supernatural sensitivity, even though she is still too young to completely control it. The entities become increasingly aggressive. When they realize that Maya is resisting them, the house begins filling with supernatural activity, and Maya is forced to hide and protect herself. She knows that her mother is somewhere connected to the further and that she may be the only person capable of bringing Gemma back. Instead of simply waiting for help, Maya begins trying to reach her mother through their shared connection. She focuses on the memories they share especially moments when Gemma made her feel safe. These memories become a kind of emotional anchor that helps Maya establish contact with Gemma across the boundary. Gemma senses Maya calling to her from the living world. This moment becomes one of the strongest emotional points in the story because Gemma realizes that her daughter is not simply waiting for rescue. Maya is actively trying to reach her. Gemma follows that connection and begins moving toward the boundary between the further and reality. But Cyrus realizes what is happening and attempts to stop her. He knows that if Gemma returns to the physical world with control over her ability, his plan may fail. He therefore sends his followers after her, forcing Gemma to fight her way through the supernatural realm. As Gemma tries to escape, she discovers that the further can be manipulated through her ability in ways she never imagined. She is able to move physical objects between worlds, and she begins experimenting with that power. At first, she had been frightened by the fact that she could transport something from reality into the further. Now she realizes that the ability may allow her to reverse the process or even move entire spaces across the boundary. This possibility is so powerful that Gemma herself is almost unable to comprehend it. If she can control the connection at that level, she may not have to fight every demon individually. She may be able to remove the entire environment in which the demons are operating. However, controlling such an enormous ability requires Gemma to remain completely focused. Elise understands this and tries to guide her. She tells Gemma that fear is the biggest obstacle. Gemma has to clear her mind and trust that she can control the connection. The further has spent the entire story convincing her that she is powerless, but Elise reminds her that Gemma possesses something the entities do not. Gemma belongs to the living world. She has a physical connection to reality, a daughter. Meanwhile, Maya continues fighting to survive inside the house. The supernatural forces surrounding her become more aggressive, but she refuses to give up. She knows that Gemma is trying to return, and that she must stay alive long enough for her mother to find her. Maya's courage mirrors Gemma's own transformation. Earlier in the story, Gemma wanted to protect Maya by hiding the supernatural truth. Now Maya is proving that understanding the truth can make her stronger. The two generations of women are no longer simply victims of the further. They are learning how to fight back. Elise also becomes involved in protecting Maya. Her knowledge of the further allows her to recognize the danger immediately. She helps Maya survive the entities that are closing in and attempts to keep them away long enough for Gemma to return. Elise understands that Gemma's plan is extremely dangerous, but she also recognizes that Gemma may be the only person capable of stopping Cyrus. Elise therefore focuses on keeping Maya alive, while Gemma prepares for the final confrontation. Cyrus becomes increasingly desperate because his promised escape is beginning to disappear. His followers have trusted him to lead them out of the further, but Gemma's resistance threatens everything he has promised them. He becomes more violent and abandons much of the manipulation he used earlier. Now he wants to force Gemma to open the connection, but Gemma has finally stopped being controlled by fear. She realizes that Cyrus's greatest weakness is his dependence on her cooperation. Without Gemma's ability, he cannot create the pathway he needs. That gives her the advantage she needs to complete her plan. Gemma finally reaches the point where she can see both worlds overlapping. Her childhood home appears simultaneously as a real building and as a distorted structure inside the further. She realizes that the house itself has become the perfect trap. Every entity that has crossed into the real world is connected to that location, and Gemma's power can potentially move the entire structure. The idea is terrifying because she does not know whether she can control something so large, but Elise tells her that she must stop thinking about the limits that fear has placed on her. Gemma has already demonstrated that she can move objects between worlds. Now she must trust herself enough to do something much bigger. Gemma focuses on Maya, remembering why she entered the further in the first place. She thinks about the promise she made to herself that Maya would have the childhood she never had. She realizes that the only way to fulfill that promise is to end the supernatural threat permanently. With her mind focused on Maya rather than on her own fear, Gemma begins using her ability at a completely different level. The house starts responding to her power, and the boundary between the worlds begins shifting. Cyrus realizes too late that Gemma is no longer trying to escape through the doorway. She is preparing to take the doorway itself away. The supernatural entities begin losing their advantage as the house becomes unstable. The walls and rooms appear to shift between the physical world and the further. The entities that once believed they were about to escape suddenly realize that they may be trapped again. Cyrus tries to stop Gemma, but his control begins slipping. The followers who trusted him begin turning against him because he has failed to deliver the freedom he promised. Gemma continues concentrating. Despite the overwhelming supernatural pressure, she knows that one moment of panic could destroy the plan. She keeps thinking about Maya and the life she wants to give her. She remembers the pain of her own childhood and understands that she now has the chance to prevent that pain from being repeated. Her ability grows stronger as her determination becomes clearer. The house is gradually pulled toward the further, taking the supernatural entities with it. At the same time, Maya is finally reunited with the protection of Elise. She is frightened, but she realizes that her mother is still fighting for her. Elise tells her that Gemma is trying to save everyone by controlling the doorway. Maya understands that her mother may have to make an enormous sacrifice, but she refuses to believe that Gemma will abandon her. This emotional connection becomes the final anchor Gemma needs. Across the boundary between worlds, mother and daughter remain connected. Gemma's final challenge is, therefore, not simply defeating Cyrus. She must overcome the belief that her ability is something she cannot control. For most of her life, the supernatural gift has been associated with fear, trauma, and her mother's suffering. Now Gemma finally chooses to see it differently. The same ability that caused so much pain can also protect the people she loves. Instead of allowing Cyrus to use her as a doorway, Gemma takes control of the doorway herself. As the seventh part reaches its climax, the supernatural house begins disappearing from the ordinary world. Gemma is no longer simply trapped inside a haunted home. She is manipulating the relationship between the entire house and the further. Cyrus and the other entities realize that they may be losing their opportunity to escape. Gemma's plan is beginning to work, but she is still trapped on the other side and must find a way back to Maya before the connection closes completely. The final stage of the battle is now approaching, and Gemma has to make the most dangerous decision of all: save herself and return immediately, or use her remaining strength to ensure that Cyrus and the other entities are taken back with the house into the further. Gemma reaches the most dangerous point of her journey as the connection between the further and the living world begins to collapse around her. She can feel that her plan is working, but she also understands that she has very little time left. The supernatural realm is becoming unstable, and the entities that once moved freely through it are suddenly being pulled toward the places where they belong. Cyrus refuses to accept that Gemma has gained control. He continues fighting against her, trying to force the doorway open before it closes. Gemma knows that if she loses concentration for even a moment, Cyrus could regain control and use her ability to escape. She therefore focuses entirely on Maya and on the promise she made to protect her daughter. For Gemma, this is no longer about proving that she is stronger than a demon. It is about breaking a cycle of fear that has followed her family for generations. Inside the further, the environment around Gemma becomes increasingly chaotic. The familiar images that once appeared to her as memories begin disappearing and changing rapidly. The house appears in different forms, sometimes looking exactly as it did during Gemma's childhood and sometimes appearing as a dark and distorted version of itself. Voices echo through the rooms, and some of them sound like people Gemma knows. She understands that the further is attempting one final time to confuse her. Cyrus wants her to lose sight of reality so that she will make a mistake. Gemma therefore stops responding to the voices and concentrates on the one connection she knows is real: her bond with Maya. Whenever she hears Maya calling her, she uses that sound as a guide. She knows that the entities can imitate voices, but the emotional connection between mother and daughter is something they cannot completely reproduce. Cyrus begins attacking Gemma more directly. He realizes that emotional manipulation is no longer enough, so he attempts to overwhelm her with the power of the further itself. The darkness around them becomes more intense, and the entities that have gathered around him move toward Gemma. They know that if she escapes, their chance of reaching the living world may disappear. Gemma is surrounded by spirits who want to use her ability, but she refuses to surrender. She understands that these entities are desperate because they have spent so long trapped in the further. Some may have forgotten what it means to live, while others have become consumed by anger and hatred. Cyrus has turned their desperation into a weapon, convincing them that Gemma is responsible for keeping them trapped. Gemma realizes that she cannot defeat all of them through physical confrontation. She must control the doorway itself. Back in the living world, Maya can sense that something enormous is happening. The house seems to react to Gemma's struggle. The temperature changes, objects move, and the presence of the further becomes stronger before suddenly weakening again. Maya understands that her mother is trying to close the connection. She also realizes that Gemma may be trapped on the other side. Instead of becoming overwhelmed by fear, Maya begins concentrating on her mother. She remembers the moments when Gemma comforted her, protected her, and promised that she would never leave her alone. These memories become an emotional connection between the two worlds. Maya does not know exactly how her ability works, but she instinctively reaches toward the further through that connection. Gemma feels Maya's presence and realizes that her daughter is helping her. This changes everything. Until this moment, Gemma has been trying to protect Maya by keeping her away from the supernatural conflict. Now she understands that Maya is not simply someone who needs to be protected. Maya possesses a strength of her own, the supernatural ability past. And that brings us to the end of our complete explanation and review of Insidious. Out of the further, this movie takes us deeper into the terrifying, supernatural world of the further while introducing us to Gemma, a mother whose extraordinary ability becomes both her greatest danger and her greatest weapon. Throughout the story, we see her struggle with fear, family trauma, supernatural forces, and the responsibility of protecting her daughter Maya. Movie gives us creepy moments, disturbing entities, emotional family scenes, mysterious twists, and a final confrontation that shows how courage and love can become stronger than fear. In our review, we also discussed the movie's story, characters, performances, horror elements, atmosphere, visual effects, supernatural mythology, pacing, emotional themes, and the strengths and weaknesses of the overall film. Although the movie has some predictable moments and occasionally explains its supernatural mythology more than necessary, it still offers an entertaining experience for fans of supernatural horror and the Insidious franchise. The relationship between Gemma and Maya gives the movie an emotional heart, while the further continues to provide the dark and mysterious atmosphere that makes this franchise unique. Most importantly, the movie reminds us that running away from fear does not always make it disappear. Sometimes, we have to face our fears, understand them, and refuse to let them control our lives. Gemma's journey is ultimately about breaking the cycle of fear and making sure that her daughter does not inherit the same darkness that haunted her childhood. So, what did you think about Insidious? Out of the further, did you find the movie genuinely scary? Or do you think the franchise has started becoming predictable? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this complete movie explanation and review, don't forget to like the video, share it with other horror fans, and subscribe to the channel for more detailed movie explanations, reviews, endings, and stories. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the darkest doors are the ones we should never open.